Will you talk a little bit about that? Because I bet there are some other people watching. Maybe they've adopted children or they have that longing in their heart that God has placed there. And I think you all had to work so hard to get them. You had to be so faithful in that process. And then it wasn't just roses once they came home. Megan, it's so wonderful to be with you today. Thank you for coming to talk to me about Moms Change the World. And to start out, I'd love for you just to share with people who you are and a little bit about your own story so they have a sense of who you are.
Gotcha. I'm Megan Carpenter. I am married to Hunter Carpenter. We have 5 children. 3 are biological, 2 are adopted. They range, our oldest is 21, and then our bottom 3 are 16. Currently, that is my identity in some ways. I grew up in a small town in Mississippi, and then we lived in Little Rock, Arkansas for about 14 years before moving to Dallas about 11 years ago when I met you. And then, that we just do life. 2 dogs at home. Most days are not typical, but that's just kind of the way we roll.
And you went to Ole Miss.
That's right.
So we share hottie toddy.
Hottie toddy, yes. And we heard yesterday that we got Chambliss back, so that's huge.
Very exciting. Winnidad.
Yes.
Look him up.
Yeah.
Trinidad is his real name. Well, I wanted to just thank you for sharing that background. I wanted to hear a little bit about your story with your 2 daughters that you adopted. And if you don't mind taking us back to when you and Hunter began to discern that God might be calling you, inviting you to adopt children, a little bit about how did that happen for you all?
Right. It's very vivid in my mind because Lawler, our oldest, who's 21, was 6 weeks old. And I went to church, and at that point, Hunter stayed at home with her because she was so tiny. And at that point, we were going to a big Bible church, and this group of children from Uganda came through, and they're not related to adoption. They just were a choir that was performing. But I remember sitting up in the balcony and hearing the Holy Spirit say, "You're going to have a child that looks like that one day." And I just remember thinking, I have this precious little blonde-headed baby at home, and Hunter's going to think I'm crazy. And so as I was driving home that Sunday, I was like, "Lord, if this is you, then you're going to have to open the door for the conversation." And that afternoon, we were sitting on our back porch. It was a pretty spring day. And I said, "You're going to kind of think I'm nuts." I said, "But I really think we're supposed to adopt a child, and they're not supposed to look like us." And his eyes just began to tear up, and he was like, "Megan, ever since, high school," when he played basketball in high school and college, so they always had kids in and out of his home that his parents never truly adopted, but quasi did. And he said, "I've always kind of felt that call on my life too." At that point, we sort of sidelined it, but at the same time, we also told our dearest friends more to keep ourselves accountable to the call, because before we knew it, we had Brackett, who came along 2 years later, and then I was pregnant with Willis, and we even actually pursued the foster care system at one point, and that just sort of fizzled, which was God's timing. But all along the way, we would just tell friends, and it held our feet to the fire, because when Willis was about 2, I came to Hunter and I was like, if we're going to really do this, we really need to start praying and asking the Lord what it's going to look like. So do you want me to keep talking?
Well, I think for people who maybe aren't practiced or aren't even sure if God talks to them, you said that you felt like the Holy Spirit told you something. Will you explain what that means to you and how you hear God's voice? Will you just explain a little bit about how you believe God communicates and how you knew it was God?
That's a good, I guess since I was a child, the Lord speaks to me through dreams, and then just these kind of knowings, and it's not obviously not an audible, loud voice, but inside my spirit, I do hear just usually concrete phrases. All throughout high school, I used to read Utmost First Highest, and he always speaks about there's a call to obey. And to me, when the Holy Spirit speaks, it just doesn't go away. And so that to me, like when people ask us about adoption, it was a call to obedience, really.
What is my utmost for his highest for people who don't know?
That's good to know. It's a daily devotional by Oswald Chambers, who Oswald, I want to meet him one day in heaven, but has been gone a long time. But the truths are just so timeless. And it usually is, in his words, God holds your feet to the fire to step out in obedience and service. And so that, to me, like was something that was really just shaped my thought patterns at an early age. And I was raised in a family that also believed that the Lord still speaks. And so it was just a very easy, I guess when you kind of grow up with it, it's kind of even hard to know there's a knowing. But for me, it's not always, I had it happen the other night when I asked the Lord about something that was hard that was going on. But you have to also get your heart quiet and be willing to listen.
That's so good. So it sounds like for you, your faith in God has always been connected to obedience to what you feel like God is inviting you to. So in some ways, knowing that you were supposed to adopt a child was something you had already been practicing, in that when you felt like God was inviting you to something, you were used to following.
Yes.
But did this feel different in a way?
Yes, because it was such a long journey. But God was so good in affirming each step. So when we literally spent like a whole summer, kind of rewind, that would have been 14 years ago. And just asking the Lord, if this is what you're calling us to, where, from. And then we had some other big things on the table also. And at that point, like I said, Hunter was really more drawn to domestic adoption and really the state of Arkansas because he saw the need. And my heart was drawn to international. I can't say why, I see the need in both. And that summer, he actually was invited to what he thought was a business luncheon. And ironically, it was a gentleman from here that came to Little Rock at the time. And he got all these business guys in a room and then began to tell them about a ministry he had started in Africa. I can't remember if it was, I'll have to think of the name of the country, but where children are sacrificed because the value of their lives is so low. And Hunter came home in tears, and he said, I know I've been talking about Arkansas, he said, but I get it now. And he said, these children don't have a chance, some of them, especially girls, because they're just at the bottom of the totem pole. And so at that point, so that was very affirming that he aligned our hearts to go in the same direction. And then had another resource of another family that had adopted from Rwanda. The community of Little Rock was really involved with Rwanda at that time of rebuilding it after the genocide. And so we really started down that path, but those avenues really were sort of dried up and the rules had changed. And then the Lord led us to an attorney. And I mean, our story is, plan A went to plan B to plan C, but he kept showing up and saying, you're on the right path, and moving mountains that we couldn't have ever moved along the way.
For people like me who aren't as familiar with the plight of children in Rwanda or other countries, when you say that they sacrifice children, what do you mean by that?
So a lot of times in the rural, where you still have tribal practices, and so they're literally sacrificing children to their gods, and that's not the case where our girls came from, that was not happening as frequently. I think it varies from tribe and country and, depending on the locations. But, and when I mentioned like plan A to plan B, so we started off trying to pursue Rwanda, and then Rwanda kind of fizzled, and then the agency or the attorney we worked with said, well, there's actually same need as in Uganda. So then you have to do these things called a home study. And so we prepared a home study for Uganda, and we're approved there. And then we waited for a year or so with her. And then that lady kind of disappeared into thin air.
The lady you were going to adopt from this woman?
She was an attorney out of New Jersey that some friends had connected us with.
And she was your liaison to Uganda.
Right, and so we paid her fees and all these things, and she promised that she was going to be able to deliver, and she wasn't. But we had this home study, which had taken months to be approved for, and so I just got on the phone and started calling every agency that that the internet popped up that had resources in Uganda, and finally got a live person from an agency in Alabama called Lifeline. And I said, would y'all be willing to take us on? Because Uganda at the time was what's called a non-Hague country, and so they don't abide by the rules of the Hague Convention. And so...
And what is that?
That's a really good question. I don't really know all the details. I just know that most of the agencies, like a Bethany here, would not have facilitated an adoption for Uganda at that time because they didn't abide by these, national laws. And so, but Lifeline would, and so we got joined with them and were on their wait list for about 2 years, and then the things in Uganda began to change, and their rules changed, that they wanted you to stay in country for almost 6 months. And we had 3 children and, real job, and that really wasn't going to be feasible. So at that point, our agency approached us about a pilot program in the DRC. And I'll never forget the email, because I was standing at my kitchen sink and I read it, and it was big black bold letters, pilot program, sibling groups with an S. And Hunter forwarded it to me and said, why don't you call and ask him about this? And I said, did you see those black bold letters? Sibling groups. And all I could imagine is groups of 6 children. And he said, well, just ask them about it, see what what they think. And at the time, we did not actually get the dictionary out and look at what pilot program meant. That meant that they'd never done it before. And that we were the guinea pigs. And so we set up a phone call that fall, and they explained to me the process of in the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, the adoption process is very different. You have to have families step forward before they'll even initiate any of the court proceedings. Where in other countries, you might be on a wait list and you're number 5, you're number 4, and then they say, oh, it's time to go, because it's already been done. At the time, they said that it was going to take a year. And if all total, we'd probably already been in it for 3.
And how old are your own kids at this point?
Let's see, Willis would have been 4, 5, Brackett would have been 7, and Lawler was 9.
So you had gone from Rwanda as a possibility to Uganda, and both of those doors had closed.
Right.
So now, because of this pilot program, you're considering the DRC, and you're saying from the time that you begin the pilot program to adoption, they're telling you it might be about a year.
That's what it was supposed to be. And so a month in, they called or sent an email and said, well, the exit letters have been ceased. And we were like, well, what does that mean?
Did you, one clarifying question.
Sorry.
No, you're good. One clarifying question is, so you're thinking you're going to adopt one child, and then Hunter forwards you this email that says sibling group. How did you all determine that you still wanted to move forward, given that it was going to be more than one child?
That's a great question. So they set up a call, and so based on our information, kind of our bio, our agency presented us with 2 sets of sisters, and they don't show you the pictures until you commit. And so they described the dynamics of, that was one set of twins that were about, they thought 3 at the time, and then another sister set that was a 3-year-old and a 6-month-old. And so I'll remember that call. It was on a Monday afternoon, and we put them on silent and said, what do you think? And at that point, we felt like, just knowing the adoption world, that some other family would want the baby, the 6-month-old. And I didn't feel like we didn't feel like that the twin dynamic 3.5 to 4-year-olds would be sought after quite as quickly. And so we asked them if we could have 48 hours to pray about it, and but that we wanted to hear more about the twin set. And at that point, they did not show us their pictures, I don't think. Ironically, after waiting all these years, we'd also been in contact with a lady in Houston who facilitates adoption, but she does it mainly through prayer. And she, I think it was the same weekend that we had the initial phone call with Lifelines, and she called us and said, I think I have a mom who is a basketball player, and she just knows she's not equipped to take care of this child. And I really, it's hard when people come to you and say, I've prayed about this, and I think you're the family. And so we truly, after all, 3 years of waiting, had the decision to make of, we've got this mom in Houston, and we have these 2 little girls in the DRC, and what are we supposed to do? So that's why we also just asked for some extra time to pray. And like for 3 days, or for however many days it was, I wandered around the house, and all I could imagine is me with like a, whatever y'all call it, the things that you strap on the front, and holding these two twins, like going to football games. I don't know why. That was just the mental image in my head. And I'm like, Lord, how are we going to do this, And our deadline was whatever, call it a Wednesday morning, and Hunter went to go work out, and I was on the couch reading and praying, and the Lord just gave me this, reminded me of the story of Abraham and Sarah, and said, they were only called to one. You're not called to save the world, but you are called to these two girls in the Congo. And so we called the lady in Houston and said, we feel like some other incredible family is meant for that baby in the womb, and we're called to these two little girls in Lubumbashi, DRC. So we called our agency back and told them we wanted to move forward at that point.
Wow.
So
that's
and
incredible.
then we got to see the picture of these two very sad little girls that didn't even like have a smile. They looked like this, and their heads were shaved, and they had little orange sweaters. I mean, I've still got the pictures, but
wow.
And they did not look like they were 3.5. They looked like they were probably 2 at the time. But I mean,
wow. So then you commit to these two little girls, and how long did it take to actually have them in your home, and what did that process look like from there?
So like I said, we were told a year, and then things within their government shifted, and they really slowed down. So it ended up being almost 2 years and 9 months. And all the steps that were in between. When I say that I was thankful that we had people in Mississippi and Arkansas and Texas praying us through, I mean, almost every other week I would send a group email to people to pray, because I felt like every step that even was supposed to be easy was not. One story in particular was that, so their birth mom was still alive, and their birth mother is paralyzed and lives on the streets. And so social services had taken the girls from them and placed them in the home where we were matched with them. But our State Department does their own investigation of international adoptions. And for whatever reason, we were flagged, and they didn't believe that the birth mother was the birth mother, and they wanted proof of that. And so the State Department was literally asking us to have a swab test taken of both the mom and the daughters, but then they wanted to do it in the capital in Kinshasa, where the embassy was. And so we were literally about to book plane tickets for 2 little girls that have never even been in a car, a mother who can't walk and lives on the streets, to fly them from their little Lubumbashi to Kinshasa. And so all the logistics that was going to go into that. And like the hour before we were going to book the flights, the State Department called and said, we've kind of thought about this, and maybe it'd be easier for us to send a nurse to Lubumbashi versus, and we were like, yeah. But that was just like, when I look back, and even in times when things are hard right now, like the Lord just reminds me of, He moved the mountains to get them here. And if He brought them all the way across the ocean to us, or we went and got them and brought them, He's not going to leave us now. And so that was just one of we had to I went to Washington, D.C. and talked to the State Department. And it was lots of things.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
It's not just, a prayer and you hope to adopt these children. It sounds like it took time, consistent prayer, support from other people, financial resources.
Yeah.
Will you talk a little bit about not just the financial cost, but just the cost to your family, and how God was shaping you through all of this? You had to make a lot of sacrifices. Will you talk a little bit about that choice, those choices you and Hunter made to continue to sacrifice, and how that relates to your relationship with God, and how you believe God sees your daughters? And will you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. Gosh, that's a big question, but I do feel like because when you know that you're called to something, and we knew that we were, to step outside of those steps of obedience, I feel like there's a joy in following Jesus even when it's hard. And for me, at least, when I know that I'm stepping outside of his calls, not just with the adoption, but in other realms of life, there's just a unsettledness and a lack of peace. And so truly, to me, it was like the peace and the joy of knowing we were doing what God was calling us to do is what enabled us to walk through the sacrifices. And to your point of like time and, I mean, everything from getting the home study done to taking time away from our other children and just the emotional burden that you're carrying. And, you know, like my mind was, especially towards the end, like just constantly consumed with how are we going to get these girls out of there to here and being on the phone. And I mean, you throw in the midst of all that, the Lord also moved us from Little Rock to Dallas about a year before it was time to go get them. So there was just a lot going on. I mean, we didn't have a job at one point. I mean, you know, and so the financial aspect, I mean, some people ask us how much did it all cost, and we just kind of stopped counting. and I mean, but I'm thankful that we had the resources. We didn't have to fundraise, and there's some families that go through this, and they're not only, you know, committed to the process, but then they're having to raise money, and I'm thankful that we didn't have to go that route.
And you said Willis, your son, your youngest, was
Right.
4 when you knew about the girls. So then
Yep.
he was almost 7.
By the time they came, so they're all about the same age.
Wow.
So by the time Ruth and we went to Kinshasa to get them because we thought it was time. So that was about a month in a third world country, and then we came home and they were 7 at about that time.
So that story, so you've been waiting, and then tell me about why you decided to go there, and then what the process in the country looked like, meeting the girls, bringing them back.
Okay. So because our journey was towards the end, things are so corrupt in the DRC. And so we had an attorney on the ground that was doing all the legwork. And I mean, it sounds kind of kooky, but I mean, there were all these like secret lists, and he kind of got word that we were on the next list that was supposed to be approved. So we had to go to the country in order to get their passports and visas, American visas. And we thought we were like, we're just going to go over there, and then 2 weeks later, we're going to come home, and everything's going to be fine. Intertwined within that story is that when we landed in Brussels was our connecting flight. Just side story. That is when the bombing of March 2015 happened. And we were supposed to be on the ground in the American Airlines Admirals Club. We'd taken our backpacks. We thought we were very prepared. I had all the paperwork, and we had our, you know, in addition to these 2 huge Toomey bags that are like the size of me that we checked, we had all this stuff, but our flight had been delayed out of New York by an hour. And so we weren't at the American Airlines terminal.
It happened in Brussels.
In Brussels.
Where you were going to be.
Yeah, so when we were on the tarmac, the plane was pulling in, and it stopped. And they said, there's been a security issue. And Hunter pulled out his phone and didn't even have a Twitter account, but logged into Twitter. And he was like, this is more than a security issue. And then there were all these men with guns and hazmat suits running around. So we literally walked off out of the airport on foot with our backpacks, because we ran into an airport employee, and we were like, what about our bags? Because that's got all of our stuff that they told us we had to have in Congo. And he was like, forget about your bags. And so we walked, and then there was other bombings, and then we were able to get to Paris with the guy that drove us there.
Could you have been injured if you had been?
We would have died.
Whoa.
So bless our little Lawler's heart. So my oldest was at school, and this very mean little girl came up to her and said, there was a bombing in Brussels. I bet your parents are dead.
Oh my goodness.
So and
Terrifying.
I don't take that lightly, but again, God's peace and that washed over us. We never once were afraid. We just kind of that's kind of our journey, is we just kept taking the next right step. And that led us to this taxi driver who drove us to Paris and got us out of the country before they shut down the border. So that was the beginning of our time in Kinshasa. So that was very interesting. And then 2 days later, we met Ruth and Dorcas, who really had never seen somebody look like me. And I thought they spoke Swahili and had been practicing Swahili for 2 years, and they actually spoke French. And so, so I knelt down when our attorney's wife called and said, "We're here," and we were like in this hotel that And so we run downstairs, and I kneel down, and I'm like, Nakapenda. And they look at me, and Tina, the attorney, she's like, what are you saying? And I was like, Swahili for I love you. And anyway, so they did not. I could have been learning French for those 2 years, but
Wow.
I know.
That's
So
amazing.
It was something.
Commitment.
Yes, and so I lived, Hunter was there with me for the first 2 weeks in Africa, and then he had to come home because he had to go back to work. But there were other families that we had gone through the process with that were also there, and
Were the girls with you?
the whole time since we got them, and that was hard. I mean, being in a foreign country, a third world country where women are not allowed to go anywhere without a male. You had to wear a skirt all the time. We had no clothes, so we had to go buy clothes from from their little local shop, and so it was something. But we
Wow.
made it, and by God's grace, made it home. By April, I think it was 15th, because that was right before Brackett's birthday.
Wow.
So by that point, the girls were about to turn 7. Willis would have been 6 because he's turned 7 in September. So to answer your big question,
What an adventure with God.
yeah,
I mean, beyond your imagining, right?
mm-hmm,
And
sure.
to miss a bombing and go without your carefully prepared suitcases,
yeah,
buy clothes there.
yeah.
Wow, you went through a lot
When
to get these girls, Ruth and Dorcas, who are now
Now 16.
16.
So it'll be 10 years in April that they've been home with us.
And I know it's too much for a short conversation, but tell me some about how those early years, how that impacted your whole family, how their lives were impacted, how that impacted your other children, you and Hunter. Will you kind of go back with me to those beginning years and what that transition was like for you all?
It was hard. I mean, that's with the way I kind of describe it, is we felt like 2 tornadoes had landed upon our home. And they try to, in trainings, they try to prepare you for all of that. But just like with so many things, I think if we knew the end of the story, sometimes we wouldn't have stepped forward and said yes. And it wasn't their fault. They just had that culturally, there was no English. They had never, they couldn't even draw a circle. And but the impact on our other kids, I would say in a very positive way for Lawler at the time. She was very controlling and type. She's still firstborn, but for her, it really kind of shaped her into kind of letting go of some of that high control personality within her. For Brackett, our second-born, it displaced her in the birth order, and we saw the ramifications of that really up until probably, for many years. And she's worked through that, and God has shaped us through her journey.
Because she had been the middle child?
She'd been the middle child, and she and Willis were kind of buddies, and then all of a sudden she's like, in her words, she was like, Mama, I tried to love them so hard and wanted to be the best big sister, and it was just so hard, and I lost my relationship in place in Willis's life, because you've got these 3 that are closer in age now, and Lawler's the big sister who wants to mother everybody, and so and she has her own story and journey of how that's the Lord's shaped her through that. But that's hard to watch your other children, quote unquote, suffer, and because my attention was so taken away from them. And I think back, poor Brackett, like the things in elementary school that I didn't know she was supposed to be doing, because I was so honed in on taking care of Ruth and Dorcas and getting them acclimated and going to counseling appointments and doctor's appointments and all the things. So that would, to me, like when you mentioned the word sacrifice, that would have been, looking back, that was the hardest part, is just being pulled in so many different directions because of just a new responsibility.
And what about Willis?
So Willis, about the same time, was diagnosed with dyslexia and ADD. And so I'm blunt, obviously that's not correlated to Ruth and Dorcas, but so he had his own things going on. So when I do look back, it's hard to know what causes what. Like, he had extreme anxiety. So we were journeying with him through that too. And so that was, I mean, moving from a whole other place and leaving all your family behind and bringing in 2 new siblings is, on a 6 or 7-year-old, it's not easy, and it's hard for them to articulate too. But at one point in there, now that it's triggered a memory, he got real upset with Hunter, and Hunter said, "What's the matter, Willis?" And he said, "Daddy," he said, ever since Ruth and Dorcas have come home, y'all tell them that you love them all the time, because you're trying so hard to build these attachments with them." And he said, "But you don't tell me you love me as much." And Hunter, it was exactly what we needed to hear. And we, said, we changed that. And now to this day, Willis is my one that he won't leave the house without saying, "I love you so," and give you a big hug. And that just, but we, out of the mouths of babes, we needed to hear that, like, gosh, you can't forget about these other 3. And even though you've got to love, love, love and try to build trust, you've got to keep building the same trust with your other children.
It's so much to think about and juggle. And you and Hunter are people with limited capacity. You get these girls who have so many needs. You have your biological children who you don't want to forget. It sounds like those early years were a huge adjustment for everybody. Is there a point, I know you've gone through ups and downs because of the needs of the girls, but was there a point in your journey together where it felt like the bonding had happened and where it wasn't quite as difficult as it had been to start?
Yes, we've had seasons of that. I would say probably after the first, I'm trying to think date-wise, right about the time, 2019, where things sort of felt normal, and then you had 2020. That's kind of the way I look at it. Like, things kind of were getting normal, and then...
And what year had they been adopted?
2016.
Okay, so about 3 years in.
Things were settling down. I mean, they were doing well. I mean, as well as they could be doing in school. They were at University Park Elementary, and people were so kind. I mean, we were really surrounded by such a sweet community that really loved on them and socially helped them acclimate. And then, it's just hard to look back and know. And they're not, they were never, never trouble. It's just more I think your expectations are for things to look one way, and things don't always look and feel the way what you expected.
Will you talk a little bit about that? Because I bet there are some other people watching, maybe they've adopted children or they have that longing in their heart that God has placed there.
Yep.
And I think you all had to work so hard to get them. You had to be so faithful in that process. And then it wasn't just roses once they came home. Will you maybe talk to those people who are going through what you've been through, or women and their husbands who may be discerning a similar calling, about that endurance that you all have had and that calling that God has given you uniquely, and how you've seen his hand even during the hard times?
For sure. That would, I'm trying to gather my thoughts a little bit. For me, when we are in hard seasons, and ironically we are right now, there's another mom that I met somewhere along the way, and their family here that also adopted. And the way she put it was, Megan, this isn't God's plan A. God's plan A is for children to be with their parents. It doesn't make it wrong, but we're plan B. And so it may not feel like we want it to feel. And we love our girls with all of our heart, but that's evidenced by sometimes things just don't, the relationship's different than it is with our biological children. There are days that it's not fun, and not because of them. It's because of what they went through. They carry a lot of trauma, and their ability to trust and to love the way we think love looks like is different. And so there is, it takes us a sense of, and I can certainly get down in the ditch on it, but I have to keep coming back to Jesus and having him remind me that this was my plan for your family, and this is what I put them, as the scripture says, I put the orphan within a family, and I know he's in it. I know he's not going to leave us, even when things don't look the way I think they're going to look. And it may take, I think the statistic is it takes however many years that your child was without you times 3 for there to be a solid attachment. And so if you do the math, that means 21, 22, and we're at 16. And so there's days that we feel like there's a really strong attachment. There's actually I could go into an emotional triangle that a lot of professionals refer to. I think I can't remember the name, but and they really vacillate between those getting out of that base level survival mode to a stronger normal emotional capacity to really trust and love, and they sort of vacillate back and up and down. So we'll have months that we're like, wow, things are really, we feel like we're really jihading and getting there, and then we'll have a season where we feel like we take 10 steps back. And that's really where I have to really dig in and hear from the Lord and be filled up with the Holy Spirit of what he can give me, just strength for the day, if that makes sense.
Very much. Megan, we've known each other 11 years, and I've seen you through this journey. I've seen you when you went over to get the girls, because you were in Dallas at that point, and watched you mother them and be so faithful. And just sitting kind of on the other side, I think other people who listen will feel this way, but just really want to honor you and Hunter and your family for the sacrifices you've made in obedience to God, and the willingness to do the hard thing that doesn't look like the picture we have of adoption necessarily. And just want to say what a witness it is to me of your love for Jesus and the way that you and Hunter and your family have been willing to follow him into hard places, and really just want to celebrate you all and your family of 7 and just the work that God has done, and bless you all with that continued work that I know he's doing. Is there anything that you would say to another mom or dad, or even a biological child of a family who maybe is in the middle of a tough time, or you could answer these two separately, or to parents who are feeling that tug towards adoption? Is there anything that you would want to say to them?
I would say it does take discernment. That this is not I think you said this earlier, it's not going out and serving at the soup kitchen for 3 hours and then coming back home. It's, if you don't know in your heart and really, in your spirit, that it's something you cannot walk away from, then you don't need to do it. Hunter actually takes people to lunch that are interested or have questions, and he usually starts the conversation by trying to talk them out of it. Whoa. And he was like, if you can be talked out of it, then it's not for you. Because you have to, it's 24/7. It's just like being a parent. It is being a parent. There's no breaks in it. And so that is kind of the way we usually shape conversations when people ask us. I'm a little bit more Pollyanna and like to tell all the highlights, because it's when I have to look back. It's why God calls us to have stones of remembrance of, we've got to look back and see how faithful he's been, because we know he'll be faithful again, and he'll continue to be faithful. And to your point on this is the way Jesus loves us. We spit in his face and don't act like we love him, and probably don't tell him we love him enough, and don't give him hugs, and he still loves us and pursues us. And so that takes, I'm obviously not Jesus, but it takes the Jesus within me to do this every day.
Wow. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. This has been great.
So wonderful.
Yeah.